Next up on the list is the processes page. This will now have all of the actions that we've made added to a long list where you can then select which jobs are going to run on files, so which actions are going to run every time you open a file. Before we do that though, this is now a good time to stop and clean up the project. I like to do this multiple times throughout the project and have a real good kind of clean up and edit. I've gone ahead and done a lot of it, which is just mostly renaming things and starting to make the process view models and data models just like we've done before. Nothing new that you need to really learn there. But I thought this would be a great time for you to learn the ability to kind of read and interpret GitHub commits, because that's going to be vital in any kind of software role. So let's just take a look at that. So first in the application, if we take a look, one of the main things I've done, you'll notice, is these used to say Actions tab, Save View Model, Actions tab, Save Drawing Model, so on and so forth. All of these had the word tab, Actions tab, and I've just renamed them, pressing F2 to Action tab. If we take a look at Git, so if we go to github.com/angel6/YouTube, so we just do that from the start, it'll take you to this active project. We can click in the commits and find the latest commits. Now there's 3 here. This middle one is the photo I've just shown you updating the mockup. This is the first one with lots of cleanup. So let's start at this one and see if you can understand what's gone on with the changes. One of the first things you should notice is in the CS_proj files of both the desktop and the browser, we have the .NET change from 10 to 9. And this is because I was experiencing issues with 10, mainly in publishing when we start to come to publishing. So I've just renamed them back to 9. If we wanted to do that in here, we just literally right click, edit, and then CS_proj. And I've just typed in over here and changed the .NET framework. You can also see at the left side, it will show you the specific files that are changed. And when you click them, it just scrolls on this side. So this is the one thing I don't really like about GitHub is I prefer, as I'm scrolling here, for it to match this left side with what's actually visible. So here you can see application DB context is visible. I want that to be selected here automatically as I'm scrolling. I don't know if there's a way to do that in this, but that's one of my pet peeves, is that you'll say click on action data model, you'll look at the code change, and then you'll carry on scrolling. You're not sure if you miss this kind of break here that you've actually changed files. It's not super convenient for me. I'd like to click each file, review the changes, and click the next one. If you prefer that way, you can just open GitHub Desktop, which is what I'm going to do here. Go to the same commit, and now you can see individual files clicking to see just their changes. But then the downside to GitHub Desktop is that the file names are not in a tree view, they're in just a big long string like this, which is just ridiculous. I don't think that's very clean. So if only they could combine the two, we'd have a perfect visual between the two. Just I think because this is even worse, not having a tree view, than the changes here splitting will go back to the website. For the project files, all we've done is change the .NET framework. The settings database we can ignore, that just simply gets deleted and remade, so there's no changes there. And then as we're working through, I'm just going to collapse the folders that we know we've dealt with and understand, so that we can kind of see easier what we're doing. Next up, what I like to try and do is find files with the least amount of change to kind of understand what's changed without getting overwhelmed by too many files. So as you can see here, we have Actions tab, Save Model View, and in here you can see it's renamed the view models to just Action. So we've removed S tab from all of them. And this is all IntelliSense doing this, so I haven't gone through and edited all these files and changed these. As I mentioned, I just basically went to the view models, clicked on, say, Actions, what was Actions tab, Save Drawing View Model, press F2, and it was obviously this, and I've just deleted, pressed Enter, and it's refactored all the code for me, which has then done all of these changes. So if we glance through each file, again, you can see it's just a small change. So it's just a single change here of this, and then this is the next file. So if we click through each one, you can see that most of these are just renaming of the view models. And you can see what I mean about this side not being super clear about when I've clicked this, you're just presented with multiple files every time. I just really don't like that. It's very jarring for me to not be able to just see the single file. And you can see even clicking here, Actions tab, Custom Properties View, it isn't even on screen. It's not even selected it. So it's all the way down here at the very bottom. So that's just a really poor scroll mechanism. So yeah, you definitely have to be careful when clicking these and trying to view it. Is definitely annoying. And that's every single view in here. If you click through, you'll find there's nothing other than renaming of those view models and refactoring. So all of these changes that look quite scary are all just a single rename of view models, refactoring into the views. So we can minimize the views now. That's all them taken care of. Directory packages props. This is the version numbers of NuGets. I've gone ahead and just updated a few of these from 11.3.1 to 11.3.4. And again, I like to constantly update in regular intervals so that the jump when you try to update doesn't become as severe. I had no real issues here, except when you change the packages, I've had to go and close Rider, manually delete the bin and object folder, manually run .NET restore in the command line because Rider's NuGet package restore doesn't seem to just like to work for me. Other than that, there was no issues to mention there. So that's that bit done. The view models, again, if we click through, pretty much the view models, all I've done is renamed the view models. So ignore these changes for now. These deleting of description, ID, job name, and is new. We'll come back to that. But you can see I've ultimately renamed every view model and removed the S tab from the name. So that's what all of these changes are. And I actually added the word action to the print settings profile because it's part of the actions page and didn't have action. So this is one that actually got the action added, not removed. And then you'll see now a new one called action view model. And this has come about because when we want to make this process page and we want to now add all of the actions to this list, we don't want to have to support multiple different versions of actions. So a custom property, a file action, a print action. All we care about is the name and the ID to find it again. So what we've done is made an action view model base class ultimately that comes off the view model base class. Then I've moved the common properties, so the ID, the job name, the description, and the is new, which are all common in every single action, into this base class. Then I went ahead and deleted those, so the description, the ID, the is new, and the job name from every actions view model. So that's all these deletes. I also moved this has changed that we were copying and pasting between every single one, and moved that into the view model because the only difference was the has changed wanted to know if the item was new, as well as the rest of the object changing. Now, because the action view model, all of them have the is new because it's in the base class, we can also move this down into the base action view model. The one caveat is I've had to add the get type here, otherwise this would serialize the action view model and not the derived class. So that's just a minor change there. And then I've added the toData model and toView model to this class because we'll still need to use those features when we come to have it in this process list. We still need to do, converting between view models and data models to save as part of the process. So then if we take a look back in all of these actions, they're all the same. You can see other than the rename and the deleting of these and the removal of that that's now in the base class, I've also corrected this that was just not set to new. So it still worked, but it wasn't correctly declared to say that it's overriding the base model that's now inside of the action view model. So because we already have a toData model in the base class, we need to tell it this is a new one to use in the derived class. And then that's just refactoring of names. So that's all of these taken care of. Again, what looks like a huge change when explained or looked at is obviously nothing much at all. So all of these view models now, that's all we've done. Again, if somebody's explaining their changes, it makes it a lot easier as well. So I can tell you what I did versus if I'm looking at somebody else's change like this, I'm going to have to spend time and realize that, okay, they've renamed this, why are these deleted? And then when you get to here, you'll see, this is in here. So it just takes a bit more investigation if somebody isn't explaining their git commit. But this is, like I mentioned, a vital skill to really learn, to try and review people's commits and understand what went on. So all of those actions are sorted, this action view model sorted. And now we have this actions page view model here. And this has got a lot of changes in, but again, if we look, the refresh actions page looks like it's deleted, but it just moves further down. These are just all the refactors where all of those renamed properties are used, so we can fairly quickly scan over and see that these are just all renames. So nothing hard to see there. And then you see the refresh action page reappear here. You'll also notice that in the constructors, we have design time only constructors that we just comment to say design time only. So if we look at actions page view model time only, you can see we just had this comment, but there's nothing stopping us in code just newing this up by mistake. So I've just added this extra line that literally checks if you're not in design time. So if you're not in this Avalonia designer and you've somehow called this, we'll actually throw an error and crash and tell them that this is not to be used except for design time. So just a fallback there, nothing critical. And then carrying on scrolling down, you'll see again, refactor of the rename. So all this again was done automatically for me, not something I've hand typed out. And then save macro items wasn't asynchronous. So I've just changed it from async task to a normal task. And instead of returning then nothing, I return a task completed. So again, that's just to remove a warning. And at the bottom, remove task completed. And that's that entire file. So one thing you have to really think about when you're doing these reviews is not to be put off by the sheer volume of lines and what looks like a ton of code. You just have to embrace it and realize that a lot of this is actually not that much change. You just have to scroll through and take your time to understand the change. Next up, we have a process page view model. So this was obviously the model, but there wasn't really anything in it. So now I've changed the constructor from having a constructor declared like this to having a normal constructor like this, because we need to invoke a fetch when we create this page, because there's no tabs. When we effectively come into the page, this is what loads and we want to do something. So we've passed in the database service with injection. I've then made the view models that we need. So we've got the process view model, which is basically a list of process view models. And then we have the process list has changed. So this is all identical to, you might have guessed it, the actions page. So it's just pretty much a copy and paste of these pages here. So we've got the list here, which is now the process list, just copied, say, from the custom properties list. And whether or not we have the item is based on if this list is empty. So we see this. So we're just going to mimic all this behavior, basically. So that's what I'm doing here. We have a list of processes that we want to then create, a flag whether we have them for the UI, which one's selected, and the actual item that's selected. So that's that left-hand list. That's basically this list we've done for every single page so far, nothing new there. In the constructor, we just store the database service, call a property called fetch processes. We have the design time one again, that its job is to just effectively new up a database service for the design time. On the design time constructor, we also fetch processes. And then finally here is the actual process list here. So if you wanted to do a combined thing as well, you could actually pull the commit and click here to see our process view models is here, and we've got fetch processes. But you could just go to the actual code and open that page and look at it in more of a code-friendly manner like this. So there's multiple ways you can view the edits. And you can now see here you've got more IntelliSense, and it's maybe easier for you to see what's going on when it's a new class versus a changed. And if we look at this function, you can see this fetch processes is just like all the other fetches. So if we went to the actions page view model and say looked at print list, so the fetch print list, you can see it's literally almost a verbatim clone of this. So what we do is we pull from the database service a get processes list, which again we'll come to, we haven't made that yet. We then convert that list, we sort it by job name and use the toView model, which again is the standard toView model and toData model calls we add. We listen for when the list changes to update whether it has changed, raising the event basically. If there's nothing, we return, otherwise we select the first item and then we update the save state. So all of these things are completely standard and what we already do in all the other lists. If we go back to then the changes, you can see the process view model now. So this will be a single process. We haven't gone over the action model base because this isn't an action, although it still has ID, description, and job name. It's not an action. This is literally a process. So we redefine the exact same things, ID, description, job name, and has changed, and it is new item. And then the only thing in here is we want a list of action view models. And that's why we created this base action view model, because now the process view, which if we remember is going to be this view, it's going to be this job list here. So this thing here is going to have a list of actions in. And in order to have a list of every version of an action, so custom properties, prints, drawings, we need a commonality. So for that, we have an action view model that we can now make a list of. And that's literally all there is in the process view model. There's nothing but a list. This side will just pull in every known action in a tree view and show you all of them here, so you can just drag and drop over to this view to add them. So this doesn't actually exist on the process view model. This is going to be fetched from the actions and displayed. And then we just have the to data model and to view model, nothing new there. And then the view model base has had a slight update, which was this get type change that I mentioned, so that it actually works when you have derived classes. So that's now all the view models done as well. We can collapse that. And you can see now we're looking at just the application DB context and the data models. So there's not much left to review. Let's take a look at the application DB context. In here again, you can see just a refactor of the rename, so we can ignore that. We've added this though, so this is the process data model. And if we just jump to that for quickness, you can see the process data model, and we just have a ID job name description, and then a list of action data models. And the action data model is just, again, the action view model. It's just basically a list of the ID description, and it's much easier in this case to look in here. So if we go to the data storage, data models, you can see basically an action data model just has those three commonalities like the view model, and the process data model has the same three and a list of actions. So they just mimic the view models we've already reviewed. So we jump back to the DB context again. We now know we've just got a list of processes. On the configure, one thing I've done, instead of the database just existing in the build folder, once we start to deploy and install on machines, it gets a bit more cumbersome, and we want this settings file outside of that really, somewhere easy to find. So all I've done is change the storage path to your documents, so literally the documents on your computer, and then in a folder called batch process. The SQLite doesn't automatically create folders. It will automatically create the database file, but it won't create a folder if the path doesn't have it. So we also just ensure that the folder exists. In the profiles here again, this is just the refactoring of the rename, so we can ignore them. And then because we now have a base action data model, you don't actually define the IDs because the ID is now in the base action data view model here. So when you inherit from this, so say we have import and we've inherited from the action data model, the ID is going to be pulled in automatically from the base. So we just have to simply delete all of the definitions of just ID on those. So that's what we've done there. And then we've obviously specifically just added the ID just for the action data model. The processes we've done the same, just added the ID. And that's again the entire change. So really nothing was done there but adding the process data model and setting the ID. So now we're down to this folder is the last thing we need to review. And hopefully you'll find most of these are just refactors again. So add custom properties data model. You can see it's not scrolled again. So action custom properties data model is here now. This has now inherited from the action data model. We deleted the ID job name and description. So you'll remember this is just like we've done with the view models. We've done exactly the same in the view models where we've removed the ID job name and description. And we've just done that for these data models. So each data model, as you click, inherit from here, add them here. We can see here the IntelliSense has simply got a bit confused over the commit history. It thinks we've added one called action drawing template data model, but we didn't. It's just because we've added multiple files. It thinks we've sort of renamed files, but we haven't. That's just the same thing. All of these are just deleting ID, job name, and description, basically. And the same for the print settings data model. We've added the word action to the front. We haven't done anything different than that, but it thinks we've created a whole new file. And that's everything. So there is no other change in that folder. And then we just have the database service left, which if it says load diff because it's quite large, scroll back up to the top, we can now go through this as the last one. So again, rename refactor. So we can scroll through pretty much all of these and you'll find all this is just the renaming from the IntelliSense. And then the only change we find is here we add this processes to get process list, add process, update and delete. And again, completely a copy and paste of every other item above, which is what we said we want to refactor also. So we're not just copying and pasting all of these standard add, remove and update functions. And that's it. That's the entire commit done. So even though that looks like quite a large commit, 90% of that was just renaming all of these files. So I've renamed everything from actions tab to action. I've changed the print settings that didn't have action in front to have action. And then what I probably should have done is added the process data model. So this process data model and the process view model is maybe a separate commit because that's not related to the kind of refactoring. But that's how you kind of look at a commit and understand it if it wasn't clear before. And you can use GitHub itself. You can use GitHub Desktop. You can even use the Git commits in here, but I'm already at the latest branch, so it doesn't really show as well. But you can use Git inside of Rider to see the differences. And if we go to Git down here, I've gone to the mid-project cleanup, right-click and compare with local. It opens up the side panel for us. And bear in mind, I am the latest one, and I'm comparing it to the older one before we did it. And you can see this one is a bit more intelligent, and it tells us that we renamed from Actions tab custom properties to Action custom properties. So this is a little bit smarter, and it has inside of it, you can double click and see differences. So this is probably a bit nicer and easier to see where the changes are because you're inside of Rider. So feel free to use whichever way you need to kind of interpret and understand the changes. They can be tricky, and it doesn't matter how seasoned you are with code. I think sometimes comparing code and changes is never as easy as doing the changes yourself. But hopefully this can kind of help you through how to understand and view changes in Git commits. The last one was clean up action view names, and this is simply because I forgot to rename them. And you'll see here all of these changes again in the views, but all I've done on every single one is renamed the Actions tab properties view to Actions. So I just forgot to do the views folder. So the last bit of cleanup I figured we'd do together. Now we've done all of the actual cleanup of the names and added the code, I want to focus on these, so the warnings that you kind of just start ignoring in your code and you end up with hundreds of warnings. I always like to try and keep these down to absolutely zero because warnings are there for a reason. So we want to look at the code. Sometimes it's things that you just simply can't fix in a way. It's how you want your code to work, and we have to work around that. But let's just work through these 21 errors here. So when you compile, you'll have this little warning here. I normally disable it like that so I just see builds, but every now and then when I want to refactor, click the warnings and let's work through them. Double click the first one, let's take a look. So this is saying this is irrelevant, which it now is because this was I believe this was a private observable property at some point, and we had to ignore it in JSON, but now we've converted it to a public string. So that's actually wrong in quite a few ways. So let's delete the JSON, change this to probably protected because the derived classes need to access it. I think that's fine. Next one, oh, and then sometimes you just have to recompile because it doesn't update the warnings. Next one, all of these are going to be the null reference. So yeah, possible null, we need to set default values, which you just have to get used to doing if you want to have a cleaner code where you're not expecting null to exist. You have to work around that. And then these, because crash data, this will be wanting to make it init, I'm guessing. Yeah, make property init. So this means that once you've set it in the constructor, it can't change again. But in my eyes, if I'm going to do init on all these, then I might as well turn this into a record because that's the whole point. So instead you could do record and then you could just pass the data in here. So you could do this, and ultimately this will make it the same thing. And now we can do that. So that now is the equivalent to what we had. It's got getters and inits, and it's classed as a record, not a class. The only problem there is you can't then add methods and things. This is meant to just be an immutable class, so once you create it, you can't change it. But in terms of crash data, that's fine, so I suppose we should use that. Next up, we have, again, a nullable list, which we never want to happen, so we'll new them up. Again, it wants to convert these to inits, so it's a case of, I suppose, when the data model's fetched. See, in my eyes, you don't want these to be inits, because after you fetch the data model, you might want to manipulate it and then save it again. But the IntelliSense is complaining that, basically, because we don't currently do that in code, we can make it init. So I suppose the idea here is to try and make your code only open enough for what you're currently coding for. So if we change these to init, and then we try to change this in future, we should come back in here and change it to set. That's what it's basically telling us. So it's saying instead of leaving this open that you could edit these, hard define them that you currently don't encode and limit it off. So it's one of those fields as which do you prefer to do? For now, I'm just going to do it and make the code technically more accurate and correct, because at any point, if we then wanted to alter the data models, we can just come back and change these to set. This now can't be initialized like a class open like this. You have to do new crash data, and there's parameters that go inside. So you're basically just changing how you are declaring it slightly to this kind of format. EX is never used, so for now, again, you can do this. The only thing I don't like about this is if I want to just quickly debug here and see what happened, I can't typically see the exception. Now, whether this is different in Rider versus Visual Studio, I've not really done it since then, but I typically leave this in for the purposes of if I want to just quickly hook in and debug. So the other option you have is you want to do that is you can suppress it with a pragma and do this, but that looks quite ugly for the sake. So again, for now, I'm just going to remove them where we're not using them. This one is a little more complicated because this is a setup for Entity Framework to inject for us. So it wants to link to an ID and it will fill the data model with a value. So really, we want the value to be set, but we don't want to null it. So we don't want to do this because it shouldn't ever be nullable. We should always have an actions print settings profile data model having and print settings for it to go with. It makes no sense if it doesn't have that. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't belong. So what we can do here instead is say required. And what that will force is when we create the class, similar to what we just did in when we newed up a new crash data, you can open the curly braces and define it inside. And that's what Entity Framework will do. When it news this class up, it will hook into this and define and declare it. Same for all these are all going to want to be inits because we don't actually reset them at the minute anywhere in code. So let's just do that to keep the compiler happy until we ever potentially need to edit data models. This now, though, does give us the problem where because we're converting from a view model to a data model and we don't actually have the print settings data model, we are actually going to have this as nullable because that instance requires it. So we'll backtrack on that statement and actually make that one nullable and make it init again so it can only be set when you create. We're down to 12 now, we're not far off. Let's run through these asyncs. These are nice and quick. So this is where we have an async task. So obviously you can still have a task, but if we're not awaiting anything inside of here, it makes no sense to have the async there. And then where you want to return, you just return a task.complete. So that's where we do this. And it's just so you don't leave the async in when it's not used. We'll do the same for all of these. It just looks like a bunch of classes doing exactly the same code again. So this is screaming out for a refactor as well, because you can see all these are pretty much absolutely identical calls. This is part of that monolithic class we're mentioning. We really want to refactor and make some changes to. So all of these repeating bits of code that we're now doing this to would actually just be one call. So you imagine if this had other problems in, we'd have to edit this for every single class like we're doing now, or every single method rather. Right, now we're down to just 6. So let's start at the bottom. This is complaining that we are not returning a task, and if we're a relay command, we need to return a task. So things like buttons can disable while this task is being run. And then we're also not using any async. We can make it private because nothing's calling just this. It will make the relay command public. And then we also need to return task.completed task. So that's now a more correct method. So here, that's not a possible null. Oh, this is a possible null here. This one is complaining, and this will be because when it does any, and I'm doing not any. So basically I'm saying if none of these exist, the compiler seems to prefer the all. So just saying instead of not any, doing all, and then if it isn't equals inside. So it's the same logic. To me, I find it a bit easier to read it as if not any, as in if none of them, versus if all sounds to me like you're checking for everything, but then it's for everything not equaling. So it's just more of a thing that I think I naturally write not any. I'm not against all, so let's just change it to that. And now this is where we can see clearly there's a possible null reference to paper size. And that's because obviously it's a string, so it could well be null. If you haven't selected a paper size option, the simplest option here is to just pass in a default string, because that is literally what we expect if we don't select a paper size. It will then default to a default, basically. The final two. Let's do this one. This looks easier first. The task await. It doesn't await. And paste in the task completed. Finally, one warning, and then we are clear. And the final error is saying that basically the dialog is not newed up. And that's actually, I believe that's correct. If we take a look at dialog, when we want to show it, we set the dialog to something. And when there's no dialog, it will be null. So that's actually a declaration issue. So that should be in the dialog provider. This should actually be nullable because it might not exist. And now that can be that. And then does that get rid of the final warning? There we go. So now we have a project with 0 errors, 0 warnings, all up-to-date NuGet, everything up-to-date and ready to go. So these aren't the most interesting things to do in code, but they are certainly important. We've done a hell of a lot of cleanup there. And now as we move forward to carry on with the app, we don't have as much clutter and mess. We still even want to clean up more, but I'm going to progress forward with the application first. And then one of the things we're probably going to go back to is cleaning up these repetitive calls. Anywhere where we have sort of repetitive info like this, save print item is identical to every other save action, really, just with a slight variance, every remove, every update. So this class is probably what we want to clean up at some point. 1,400 lines is way too big for a class. But for now, let's move on and start doing the process page.